This is part 1 of a new series where we take a look at every single Brock Lesnar title fight. In this video, we are taking a look at his first title fight at UFC 91 against Randy the Natural Couture. Leading up to UFC 91, Brock Lesnar only had 2 fights in the UFC and was given a fast track straight to the title shot because of his huge popularity from the WWE. He only chose professional wrestling over MMA at the time, since MMA around the early 2000s was not a profitable career, and the UFC wasn't as established as the WWE was at the time. So it only made sense for a mid-20s Brock Lesnar to make a ton of money going to the WWE. But as he entered his 30s, he wanted to test himself against the baddest dudes on the planet, and he knew that if he didn't attempt a run in the UFC against the best, that he would regret it later in life. Many people hated the idea of a WWE superstar having the potential of beating fighters who have proven themselves inside of the octagon. What many people forgot to realize is that Brock Lesnar was always a real fighter. He was the NCAA Division I National Champion in 2000. Although he lost his first fight, he proved he was a real fighter after he almost finished Frank Mir in his UFC debut. And Brock Lesnar ended Heath Herrick's career in his second bout with the UFC. Dana White was so impressed with him that he offered Brock Lesnar a multiple fight contract.
I think that people don't give Brock Lesnar enough credit just because he came from the WWE. What people don't realize is this guy was a world-class wrestler in college. He was the best heavyweight wrestler out there. And if you look traditionally in the UFC, any of the guys who have done very well, most of them have a good wrestling background, whether it's Matt Hughes, Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. The big question about Brock Lesnar was, is this guy ready for the UFC? Having so few fights. Obviously, he's huge, he's fast, he's very athletic. Anything this guy tries and sets his mind to, he excels at. And I don't think anybody was more confident about Brock Lesnar than Brock Lesnar. When I told him originally, I said, listen, the UFC isn't the place to learn how to fight. He said to me, I'm either good at this or I'm not, and I want to find out right now. I don't want to fight in small organizations. I want to come fight for the UFC. It's the biggest, it's the best, and like I said, I'm either good or I'm not. So we threw him right in there. Obviously, his first fight was against former heavyweight world champion Frank Mir, a guy who was either the best or one of the top 2 heavyweight submission guys ever in MMA history. And Brock Lesnar, a lot of people wanted to hate Brock Lesnar in his first fight because he was coming from the WWE. But after that first fight, most people respected him. He came out and was absolutely dominating Frank Mir, former world champion, before he got caught in a submission. So after his first fight, obviously, there's a lot of questions. Did he come into the UFC too fast? Should he have gotten a lot more experience in the smaller shows before he got to the UFC? And he absolutely destroyed all those questions with his second outing against Heath Herring. Heath Herring is a guy who, has fought all over the world, some of the best fighters in the world, in big organizations, has been in big fights before, and Brock Lesnar absolutely dominated him, smashed him, beat him up for 3 rounds, and that answered all the questions right there about him. That was the day that I said, this guy absolutely belongs in the UFC, and if he keeps progressing at this level, could possibly be the best heavyweight fighter in UFC history.
He chose the hardest possible career path, and in the process, brought all his fans from the WWE to the UFC and went straight to the deep end with a lack of experience. His opponent, Randy the Natural Couture, was a Hall of Fame UFC veteran who was defending his light heavyweight title against guys like Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, while Brock Lesnar was having his first run in the WWE in the early 2000s. UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture was the first 2-weight division champion in the UFC, winning both the light heavyweight and heavyweight UFC championship belts, and was the oldest fighter to win a UFC title fight at the age of 43. when Randy Couture defeated then-champion Tim Sylvia at UFC 68 by unanimous decision to claim his third UFC heavyweight title belt. He would defend the UFC heavyweight belt in his next fight at UFC 74 against Gabriel Gonzaga by TKO. But the end of his days as UFC champion would come to an end at UFC 91. It's important to remember that the UFC likely pushed Brock Lesnar to the title fight when Randy Couture was the heavyweight champion because at the time it was Brock Lesnar's best chance of winning the belt and becoming the face of the UFC. Everything apart from experience was stacked in Brock's favor. Randy Couture was 45 years old at the time, approaching the end of his career, and the UFC put him up against a man who's bigger, faster, and stronger. A freak of nature with an NCAA wrestling background. It was a terrible matchup for Randy Couture, and I know for a fact that the UFC fast-tracked Brock Lesnar to the title fight because they believed that the 31-year-old Brock Lesnar was going to steamroll over the 45-year-old Randy Couture. It was obvious biased matchmaking for the biggest name in MMA at the time. Most fighters need to win multiple fights to even get a chance of getting a title shot. Or in the case of Anderson Silva, have some credibility coming into the UFC and win their debut in devastating fashion. But Brock Lesnar was simply handed the title shot because of his name he made from WWE and his potential to bring in millions of pay-per-view buys for the UFC. The UFC needed someone like Brock Lesnar as the UFC heavyweight champion. And no disrespect to Randy Couture, he was a great fighter, but he wasn't a real heavyweight. He was a 205er that would fight at heavyweight occasionally, but spent most of his career at light heavyweight. Whereas Brock Lesnar is a man who needs to cut down to 265 pounds to make the heavyweight limit, who is someone who you could sell as the baddest dude on the planet. So let's find out exactly how Brock Lesnar ground and pounded his way into becoming the UFC heavyweight champion of the world.
Randy, the Natural Couture. Introducing first, fighting out of the blue corner, ladies and gentlemen, the challenger, Brock Lesnar.
Brock Lesnar, Randy Couture.
Round 1 begins, and Randy Couture initiates a clinch. Brock Lesnar fires off some heavy knees to Couture's legs that look very impactful. Randy Couture lands a good short right hand on a clinch break that catches Brock Lesnar clean. You can see from the exchanges on the feet that Brock Lesnar was still very new to the striking aspect of MMA. But Brock Lesnar always had fast hands for such a big dude. Lesnar shoots in for a power double leg and slams Randy Couture into the mat. Randy Couture is able to get back up to his feet and tries to take down Brock Lesnar, but Brock is just way too big and starts ragdolling Couture, but Couture ends the round back on his feet. Round 2 begins and Brock Lesnar hurts Couture early with an elbow and goes in for the finish, but Couture is able to hold on to survive and lands a flush knee in the clinch. But Brock Lesnar knees him back, and both exchange punches that leads to a cut above Brock's right eye. Brock Lesnar then eats a huge right hand and gets his takedown attempt defended, but lands a nasty knee in the clinch that hurts Couture badly. Then follows up with a big right hand, followed up by heavy ground and pound that knocks Randy Couture out. And with just 4 MMA fights, Brock Lesnar becomes the UFC heavyweight champion.
Silly erase them. True to be tweaking like somebody laced them. I know some demons and proud with they Haitian. Niggas ain't dropping no bodies, they fake. They can't get no passes if he wrote a statement. Can't get no passes if he wrote a statement.